Imagine discovering that, without ever realizing it, you've been driving the most wanted criminal in the city, not once, but over and over again. Every ride seemed ordinary. A quiet passenger, a short destination, an unusually generous tip. Nothing about him looked suspicious, until the morning news revealed that another luxury store had been robbed only minutes after he stepped out of the taxi. At first, it felt like an impossible coincidence. But when the same mysterious man kept returning, and every ride ended with another high-profile robbery, one terrifying question began to consume Daniel's mind. Had he unknowingly become the getaway driver for a serial thief, or was he being pulled into something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine? What Daniel was about to uncover wouldn't just expose a criminal, it would unravel a conspiracy buried for years, one that was deeply connected to the death of his own wife. It was nearly midnight when Daniel finished dropping off his last customer. The streets were unusually quiet, and a cold breeze drifted through the nearly empty city. After nearly 12 hours behind the wheel, all he could think about was getting home to his young daughter. Just as he was about to end his shift, a ride request appeared on his phone. The pickup location was an old bus stop that looked almost abandoned at that hour. There wasn't another person in sight. As Daniel pulled over, a lone figure slowly emerged from the darkness. The man was dressed entirely in black, wearing a hoodie with a hood pulled over his head and a cap pulled so low that his face was almost impossible to see. In one hand, he carried nothing more than a small black backpack. Without saying another word, the stranger climbed into the back seat and quietly requested to be taken downtown. As the taxi rolled through the silent streets, the ride felt strangely unsettling. Most passengers spent the journey talking on the phone, checking messages, or making small conversation. But this man did none of those things. He simply sat motionless, staring out the window as if he were waiting for something. The silence inside the taxi became heavier with every passing minute. When they finally reached the destination, the passenger pulled out a thick stack of cash and handed it to Daniel. The fare was barely $30, but the stranger had just paid him $300. Thinking it had to be a mistake, Daniel immediately tried to return the extra money. Instead, the man calmly insisted that he keep it. Then, just before stepping out into the darkness, the stranger paused for a brief moment. He looked directly at Daniel, his expression impossible to read. Before disappearing into the night, he left behind a single warning that would haunt Daniel forever. If anyone ever asked about him, Daniel was to say they had never met. The stranger vanished into the darkness, leaving Daniel confused, uneasy, and convinced he had simply driven the strangest passenger of his entire career. He had no idea, by sunrise, that mysterious ride would become the beginning of the most terrifying chapter of his life. The next morning started like any other. Daniel sat at the breakfast table with his daughter, enjoying a quiet meal before beginning another long day behind the wheel. As he reached for his coffee, the morning news flashed across the television. A luxury jewelry store had been robbed overnight. According to the police, the thief had escaped before officers arrived, and investigators believed a yellow taxi had been used during the getaway. At first, Daniel paid little attention, but the moment security footage appeared on the screen, his heart nearly stopped. The man captured by the surveillance cameras was wearing the same black hoodie, carrying the same small black backpack, and moving with the same calm confidence as the passenger from the previous night. Daniel tried to convince himself it was only a coincidence. Black hoodies were common. Thousands of yellow taxis drove through the city every night. There was no reason to believe the stranger in his cab was the same man shown on television. Still, one sentence refused to leave his mind. The mysterious warning the passenger had whispered before disappearing into the darkness. Daniel pushed the thought aside and returned to work, hoping he was simply overthinking everything. 3 nights later, another ride request appeared just before 11 o'clock. The pickup location looked familiar. As Daniel pulled up beneath a flickering streetlight, his stomach tightened. Standing alone was the same mysterious passenger. The same black hoodie. The same cap hiding his face. The same small black backpack. The man climbed into the taxi as though nothing had happened. This time, however, something was different. Before Daniel could even greet him, the stranger casually addressed him by name. Daniel couldn't remember ever introducing himself. He searched his memory, wondering if they had met somewhere before, but nothing made sense. The passenger simply brushed it off with an innocent explanation, claiming that observant people noticed small details. The answer sounded reasonable, yet it only made Daniel more uncomfortable. Once again, the destination was a wealthy part of the city, filled with luxury boutiques, jewelry stores, and expensive watch dealers. The ride lasted only a few minutes, and just like before, the passenger handed Daniel far more money than the trip was worth before quietly disappearing into the crowd. By the following morning, the city woke to another headline. A luxury watch boutique had been robbed during the night. Daniel's hands trembled as he stared at the television. The robbery had happened only minutes after he had dropped off his passenger. One coincidence was easy to dismiss. Two felt impossible. But the nightmare didn't stop there. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern repeated itself again and again. The mysterious passenger appeared 6 more times. Every pickup happened late at night. Every destination was within walking distance of the city's wealthiest stores. And by sunrise, another robbery dominated every news channel. At first, Daniel searched for innocent explanations. Maybe the man worked nearby. Maybe someone else was committing the crimes. Maybe it was all just terrible timing. But the more he thought about it, the harder those excuses became to believe. Eventually, Daniel noticed something even more disturbing. Whenever the stranger climbed into the taxi, his backpack looked almost empty. But when he returned, it always seemed noticeably heavier. The passenger never looked frightened. He never rushed. He never acted like someone fleeing a crime scene. Instead, he carried himself with the calm confidence of a man who believed he was always one step ahead. For the first time in his life, Daniel found himself asking a question that sent chills through his entire body. Had he unknowingly become the getaway driver for the city's most wanted criminal? Or was he being manipulated into something far more dangerous than he could possibly understand? By now, Daniel could no longer convince himself that everything was just a coincidence. Every late-night ride with the mysterious passenger was followed by another daring robbery before sunrise. The pattern had become impossible to ignore, yet there was still no proof that the man was actually committing the crimes. Daniel found himself trapped in a battle with his own conscience. Part of him wanted to refuse the next ride request the moment it appeared on his phone. But reality was far more complicated. His mother's hospital bills continued to grow. His daughter's school fees were already overdue. The monthly payment on his taxi was only days away, and every dollar he earned mattered. So each time the stranger appeared, Daniel repeated the same lie to himself. He wasn't helping a criminal. He was simply driving a passenger. Whatever happened after the ride wasn't his responsibility. At least, that was what he wanted to believe. Then came the night that changed everything. Rain poured relentlessly over the city as another ride request appeared just before midnight. Daniel already knew who it would be. Sure enough, beneath the glow of a flickering streetlight stood the same familiar figure, dressed in the black hoodie and carrying the small backpack that had become the symbol of Daniel's growing nightmare. The passenger climbed into the back seat as calmly as ever, showing no sign of fear or urgency. Throughout the drive, Daniel watched him through the rearview mirror, searching for the smallest clue that might reveal who he really was. But the stranger remained perfectly composed. Not nervous, not impatient, almost as though he already knew exactly how the night would unfold. As they entered the city's wealthy business district, Daniel noticed something unusual. Several police vehicles were parked only a few streets away from a prestigious diamond showroom. Officers stood outside, scanning every passing vehicle while security guards patrolled the surrounding streets. It looked less like routine patrols and more like a carefully planned trap. For a brief moment, Daniel felt relieved. If the mysterious passenger truly was the thief, tonight would finally be the night he was caught. The taxi stopped near a narrow alley. The stranger stepped out without hesitation and disappeared into the darkness, never once looking back. Instead of driving away, Daniel remained where he was. Curiosity had finally overcome fear. Minutes passed in complete silence. Then, the piercing sound of alarms shattered the night. People rushed out of the diamond showroom in panic as terrified screams echoed through the streets. Within seconds, police officers sprinted toward the building while flashing blue lights illuminated the rain-soaked roads. Another robbery had just taken place. Daniel's heart began pounding. As chaos consumed the street, he noticed a familiar figure calmly emerging from a nearby alley. It was the mysterious passenger. There was no panic in his expression, no desperate attempt to escape. He simply walked through the confusion as though he were another ordinary pedestrian caught in the commotion. Moments later, he reached the taxi, quietly climbed into the back seat, and settled into his place as if nothing unusual had happened. Daniel froze. Every instinct told him not to move. Before he could decide what to do, bright blue lights suddenly filled his rearview mirror. A police patrol car had spotted the taxi. Its siren erupted into the night. Another patrol car joined the pursuit. Then another. Within seconds, Daniel realized they weren't chasing a suspect anymore. They were chasing him. His pulse raced as the gap between the police cars and his taxi disappeared. From the officer's point of view, the evidence seemed obvious. A robbery had just occurred. The same yellow taxi had been waiting nearby, and the suspected thief had climbed directly into its back seat. Daniel hadn't stolen a single diamond. He hadn't broken into any store. But none of that mattered anymore. To the police, he no longer looked like an innocent taxi driver. He looked like the getaway driver for the city's most wanted criminal. And in that terrifying moment, Daniel realized his life was about to change forever. The chase ended with Daniel's taxi surrounded by flashing police lights. Within seconds, armed officers ordered him out of the vehicle. Confused and terrified, Daniel raised his hands, insisting that he was nothing more than a taxi driver caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But when the officers opened the rear door, the mysterious passenger had vanished. There was no broken window, no open door, no sign that anyone had escaped. The back seat was completely empty. The officers searched every inch of the taxi, but the stranger had disappeared as if he had never been there. For Daniel, the mystery had only grown deeper. At the police station, detectives began connecting the dots. Security footage from every robbery was placed side by side, revealing the same man entering luxury stores moments before each break-in. Minutes later, cameras captured him calmly climbing into Daniel's yellow taxi. The evidence painted a devastating picture. Even though Daniel had never entered a single store, it appeared that he had spent weeks transporting the city's most wanted criminal. The lead investigator made one thing painfully clear. Daniel was no longer just a witness. He was the prime suspect's suspected accomplice. Desperate to prove his innocence, Daniel searched his memory for anything that could identify the mysterious passenger. Then, while studying a clear photograph taken from one of the surveillance cameras, a forgotten memory suddenly came rushing back. He had seen that face before, not inside his taxi, but years earlier, at the funeral of his late wife. The same man had stood quietly in the distance, watching the ceremony before disappearing without speaking to anyone. The realization sent a chill through Daniel's body. The stranger hadn't entered his life by accident. He had been connected to Daniel's family long before the taxi rides ever began. Instead of running from the investigation, Daniel made a decision that surprised everyone. He voluntarily returned to the police station and offered to help catch the mysterious man once and for all. Detective Laura Bennett agreed to give him one chance. Together, they formed a dangerous plan. Daniel would continue driving his taxi as though nothing had happened, while undercover officers secretly monitored every move. If the stranger requested another ride, Daniel's only job was to remain calm, follow instructions, and lead investigators to wherever the passenger was hiding. For several tense nights, nothing happened. Then, just before midnight, Daniel's phone vibrated. Another ride request. The pickup location was an abandoned railway station on the edge of the city, a place that had long been forgotten. Daniel immediately alerted Detective Bennett before heading to the location. Hidden surveillance teams quietly moved into position while Daniel pulled up outside the deserted station. Right on schedule, the mysterious passenger emerged from the shadows and climbed into the back seat with the same calm confidence he had shown from the very beginning. This time, however, the destination was different. Instead of another wealthy shopping district, the stranger directed Daniel toward an abandoned industrial area on the outskirts of the city. The streets grew darker with every turn until they finally stopped outside a rusted building marked with a faded sign. Warehouse 17. Without hesitation, the passenger unlocked the old metal door and disappeared inside. Daniel parked a safe distance away and immediately signaled Detective Bennett. Within minutes, she arrived with 2 undercover officers. Moving silently through the darkness, they surrounded the warehouse and carefully peered through a cracked window. What they expected to find was millions of dollars in stolen jewelry. Instead, the warehouse held something far more shocking. Its walls were completely covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, court documents, property records, and maps connected by hundreds of strands of red string. At the very center of the room hung the photograph of one powerful businessman. Directly beneath it, written in bold black letters, was a sentence that stopped everyone in their tracks. The man who destroyed our families. As Daniel slowly scanned the wall, his breathing became heavier. Among the countless photographs, he saw one face he would recognize anywhere. It was his late wife. And in that instant, Daniel realized the robberies had never been about stealing wealth. They had been leading to something much bigger. Someone had been collecting the truth, one hidden piece at a time. One hidden piece at a time. But Daniel was about to discover that the greatest crime wasn't the robberies. It was the secret powerful people had spent years trying to bury. To be continued.